Surveillance is a growing fact of life these days, but I now believe we've expanded the scope of human sight to dangerous levels. I'm not a master hacker by any means, but I was definitely able to Google a script to break into my neighbor's new smart home system. Believe me when I say that ignorance is bliss, and that you can never go back once you know the truth. I should probably start by saying I'm not some creep. The idea first started as a random thought when I heard my 50-something neighbor bragging to someone else on his porch about his new smart home system. He claimed the security system and all the devices in his house were wired to the same voice command box, and he sounded damn proud of it too. He claimed it was, what did he say? Perfect security. Of course, after overhearing a claim like that floating in through my open window, I made a single search and found a dozen hits for scripts that would break into the brand he described. I laughed to myself and then left it at that. But temptation has a funny way of lurking in the back of your mind. Every few days, the thought would randomly pop into my head. I had power. Why not take a peek? It would be good for a laugh if nothing else. It's not like he would have installed cameras in his bathrooms or anything. Nah, no. Maybe. No, I shouldn't. But then spring break arrived, and while sitting at my computer, I happened to glance out the window to see my neighbor's daughter coming home from college. The temptation to use the script had already been percolating in me for weeks. The veins in my extremities constricted painfully as I realized I was actually going to do it. During my brief glimpse down into their yard, I had seen what looked like a startling attractive girl, and I couldn't connect that image to the weird girl next door I had seen last year in high school. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't a creeper thing. I just wanted a better look to understand what I had seen. I told myself I would take one quick look and then I'd be done with it. While loading up the script, I promised myself I would delete it right after. Yeah, that was the right thing to do. No harm done, and if I get caught somehow, I could just claim it was an accident. Yeah, I accidentally downloaded this hacking script. That sounded reasonable, right? A black window scrolled text down my screen rapidly for 6 seconds. And then, I was in. Nerves thrilling. I watched breathlessly through a security cam feed in the living room as the girl came in, and then headed upstairs. It was definitely the same girl I remembered, and she had definitely gotten absurdly pretty in the last year somehow. After settling into certainty, I closed the feed, deleted the script, and then spent a paranoid hour cleaning my computer of any evidence of what I had done. For maybe a week, I sat home terrified that the police would break down my door and tase me at any moment. But that's the funny thing about temptation. When no consequences followed, the urge to look began eating away at me again. I had a few drinks one lonely night and went for it before I could change my mind. The son was watching television in the living room. I couldn't see what he was watching from the angle of the camera in the living room, but he appeared to be zoned out. My neighbor himself was sitting in the kitchen working on his laptop. Again, I couldn't see what he was doing from my angle, but he was certainly downing coffee as he worked. My pulse quickened as a hallway feed caught the daughter going from her room to the bathroom, and nothing but a towel. To take a shower, I assume. Okay, borderline creepish, I told myself, but it's not like I could see into the bathrooms or anything, right? Just to confirm that I couldn't, I tried various devices around the house that the neighbor had connected to his system. Most were named with random numbers and letters. But I did find out something interesting. I found out that household devices have many more sensors than we give them credit for. A microwave in the kitchen had some sort of crude light sensor, and the system sent me its data as an incredibly blurry video feed. A large blob of darkness moved in place in front of a bright rectangle of light, and I realized then that I was looking at my neighbor on his laptop from a different angle. In fact, many devices in the house had crude light sensors or audio pickups. and I could hear the shower running upstairs on one while listening to the sun's show on another. This was all proceeding as one might expect, and I might have gone down a very dark path if I hadn't stumbled upon the unthinkable. One of the devices with a very long and very random name showed me a blurry video feed, somewhere unrecognizable. I switched back and forth between feeds comparing the patterns of light from the cameras, but this device seemed to be looking out on somewhere altogether different. Could it be the basement? The area was darker than the others, but not too dark to obscure strange gray blurs moving against the black. I kept switching until I found a security camera near the basement window. It was the only one down there, but it showed enough that I could compare the blurs. It was less that the objects were moving and more that the fuzzy sensors made the objects appear to move simply because it was a bad feed. But I pinpointed a poster, a chair, and a mirror before coming to an impasse with the final blur. This one I could only see with the sensor. There was nothing on the actual video feed. Peering closer and closer, I tried to make sense of the blob of gray and white pixels as it moved around the basement. There, and there. Recognizable landmarks amongst the junk, but no sign of it on the high-res camera. What was I seeing? Was the sensor just defective? What device was it even part of? I managed to narrow it down to a forgotten digital clock that must have been running on batteries. But nothing about this made any sense. I looked up a script to sharpen the video feed, and I let everything run all night. In the morning, I pulled myself up, got a coffee, and sat down at my computer. And then froze. Repeatedly, I played the confusing horror the script had produced. The blur of gray and shadows had become coherent, but not in any natural way. Instead, it appeared that I was looking at an androgynous gray humanoid form with a pillowcase over their head. Since this was just a graphical best guess, its glitchy movement brought out a severe unease and disgust in me as I watched it jerkily walk around the basement. It appeared to be able to navigate despite the pillowcase covering its face. And it even made it up a few steps towards the basement door before its random movements took it back down. What the hell was I seeing? For 2 days, I watched that thing stumble around my neighbor's basement before it finally went all the way up the stairs. It was 4 in the morning and all 3 of them were asleep. This time, it seemed to move with purpose. It was still not visible on any high-resolution camera, but I tracked it from sensor to sensor by watching its twitching blur. After watching its unfocused form for so long, I was beginning to get a sense of where its legs and arms were by the movement and patterns of the gray. Each limb moved as if on different conflicting joints. When it walked, it was as if its ankles, knees, and thighs each wanted to go in opposite directions. And the conflict was only resolved by odd rotations and strange body angles. Gripped by terror, I watched it slowly ratchet its way up through the kitchen and towards the second set of stairs. There was no doubt in my mind that it was heading for the bedrooms. My knuckles went white as I gripped the edge of my table. Finally, as it clambered up and out of sight of the sensors, I panicked. It still wasn't visible on the hallway cameras, but I knew I had to do something. But what could I do? If I called the house, they would have my phone number, and they would start asking questions as to why I was calling at 4 o'clock in the morning. There was no way I could pretend it was random. The only reason I even had my neighbor's cell phone number was that I had heard him say it out loud the week before on one of my feeds. But what could I do? Desperate to act, or to at least see what was happening, I left my computer and crept to a window in another room. From here, I could see into my neighbor's daughter's window, and my entire body ran with prickly terror as I spied a strange gray glow coming from her room. The sharpening script had not been wrong. It had merely been inadequate. My eyes still interpreted the inexplicable entity as an androgynous humanoid with a pillowcase over its head, but it moved through the space of the girl's room like a depressing carving etched into reality itself. I could feel why it didn't show up on cameras. It was something otherworldly. Something not entirely there. Or something visible only as an artifact of organic human perception. This was a creature outside the realm of human knowledge and observation, and I guessed that it was making its move now only because it believed itself to be unseen. It jerked and twitched forward to lean over the neighbor's daughter as she slept. Quickly and quietly, I slid open my window, removed the screen, and threw a quarter at the glass pane opposite. I ducked down immediately after and clutched the floor in abject terror. The noise from the quarter had been excruciatingly loud. Did the entity snap its pillowcase-covered head towards the sound? Had it seen me? I had no way of knowing. Or did I? Crawling back to my room, I checked the feeds. Apparently completely unperturbed by the noise, the entity had begun ratcheting its way back down the stairs. It was not fleeing to the basement. I watched as it approached the small table by the front door and began going through the mail stack there. It carefully picked out an envelope and crumpled it into oblivion in a blurry gray hand. Then it moved to the kitchen, where it began touching the keyboard on my neighbor's laptop repeatedly for nearly a minute. What was it doing? It returned to the basement and started to move in lurking circles, and I sat and stared at it half awake until a shot from both my computer and my window jolted me to full awareness. It had been my neighbor in his kitchen. He was yelling loud enough for me to hear him in real life. Stalking back and forth while talking on the phone, he was insisting he hadn't sent any compromising emails. He had been fired from his job. In the front hall, his son was busy looking through the pile of mail. He asked his sister and father repeatedly if any college acceptance letters had come in, but his father was too busy arguing on the phone, and his sister hadn't seen any. But I had. What type of entity were we dealing with here? It hadn't physically harmed anyone, but it was still lurking in their home every hour of every day, and it had made invisible moves against them by sabotaging my neighbor's job and his son's college career. At long last, my neighbor seemed to convince the other end that his account had been hacked, but he was somber and concerned about how it would reflect on him at work. The son continued on his day, oblivious to the fact that his acceptance letter had come in and had been destroyed. It was then that I began to think about the timeline of what had happened. I had resisted the urge to spy on my neighbor's family for weeks. Indeed, beyond that, he had lived there for years. If the entity had been in his basement this entire time, then perhaps they were not physically at risk. There had been plenty of opportunities to hurt them directly. No, this was something else. This was a specter of misfortune, a curse, an information parasite. But my neighbor had not been particularly unlucky as far as I knew. Not until he had gotten the surveillance system. A bunch of little complaints I had heard him make suddenly began to add up. Things had been inexplicably going wrong for everyone in his family recently. Alarm clocks had been failing to go off at the proper time. Emails and texts have been a bit weird. And each of the 3 members of his household had a general growing frustration with life. It was undermining them. It was literally lurking in the basement, lurking out of sight, and sabotaging them. And they had no idea. But where had the entity come from? Almost all of the devices and cameras had been there before. The only difference was that they had been integrated. Did observation have an effect on the physical universe? I was no quantum physics expert, but I knew that observation was a critical part of existence. Did overlapping connected layers of observation somehow enable this entity to slide into our world? When you put all the pieces together, did the whole add up to more than the sum of the parts? I began thinking up a plan of action that involved sneaking over there and turning off all their devices in hopes of banishing the entity in their basement. But as I did so, I looked down and to the left at my cell phone. It sat quietly glowing on the table, for I had moved my hand above it and activated its motion sensor. Then, I looked up and noticed the webcam above my monitor that I always kept pointed at myself. Then, I looked to my right at my television, itself containing a sensor, and the gaming console beside it that also had sensors to detect motion, microphones, cameras, everywhere. I had applied for so many internships last summer, and had gotten none. I had missed dates and lost budding relationships because of texting troubles. Everything had felt tough and difficult lately, thus why I was sitting alone on my computer most nights. I sat without breathing for nearly 20 seconds. There would be no plan. There would be no action taken. My neighbors would have to fend for themselves. I let out my breath, put my hands back on my mouse and keyboard, and loaded up a computer game. It would look like I had given up. To anyone watching me, that is.